Welcome back to the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. I'm your host, Sean, and this is the fight preview for this week's big fight. It is the rematch between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn, their first encounter earlier this year, and it was a pleasantly good fight. It was an enjoyable fight to watch. I actually look back on that with fondness now, given that I wasn't so struck on the fight originally because of the weight disparity and Eubank Jr. having to really boil down to make the weight and all the controversy which surrounded that. But it actually turned out to be a really interesting fight. And now they've decided to run it back. And here we are. We've got a big fight this weekend, one that I'm again looking forward to because of what the first fight delivered. Now, before I get into my thoughts and feelings on this fight and a preview of this fight, I just want to say thank you as always for the past couple of weeks for those that have been commenting on social media, via Spotify or via YouTube, on existing episodes that have been out there for a while or relatively new episodes that have been out there. So thank you so much for all of those that have been doing that. A big thank you goes out to the patrons of the podcast who have continued to support and subscribe on a monthly basis. We really appreciate it. The network is thriving as a result of that support and all of the other support across social media and all the boxing history posts. Again, thank you if you've been engaging in that manner as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into this conversation and about this fight this weekend. As I opened the show, I talked about how pleasantly surprised I was with the first outing. And I was genuinely pleasantly surprised by it because I wasn't sure what to expect in this fight. I thought the experience of Eubank would trump Conor Benn. There was a lot of people that felt like maybe Conor Benn would get to Eubank Jr. later on because of the weight disparity and the cut that he had to make for that fight. But actually, all three judges in this fight scored it unanimously for Chris Eubank Jr., 116 to 112. Let's go back to that first fight and look at how that began. Of course, Conor Benn, as I expected and as many people expected, he came out the blocks flying. He tried to be the aggressor throughout the first half of that fight. He tried to be the one to control the fight. And for Chris Eubank Jr., it was a case of, weathering the storm and picking his moments. And you could see the difference between when Chris Eubank Jr. hurt Conor Benn and when Conor Benn hurt Chris Eubank Jr. Although Chris Eubank Jr. was a little bit of a mess after the fight, and you would have looked at their two faces and maybe thought it would have gone the opposite way. It wasn't. It was a controlled performance, I thought, from Chris Eubank Jr. There were times where he had to really get in the trenches with Conor Benn because that's the type of fight Conor Benn really wanted. He wanted to drag him down to that level where he would make a mistake, where he could capitalise on that mistake. But Conor Benn wasn't able to do that because Chris Eubank Jr.'s boxing ability, it shone through in this fight, which is why he won the fight. He picked his moments, he picked his spells, and he picked them well. And that's why he won that first fight. This second fight, what do I make of it? Well, first of all, I didn't see the need of the second fight happening. That's my first opinion on the matter because I thought it was quite a comprehensive victory, a unanimous decision, 4 rounds ahead for Eubank Jr. on all 3 of the judges' scorecards. I mean, what doubt is there really about needing to do this again? The fact that it's been done again is either a contractual obligation or it's the fact that they believe it is going to sell because it is on DAZN pay-per-view. So the fact that they feel it's going to sell and put bums in seats again is probably the reason why it's happening again. I'm not privy to what goes on behind the scenes in this particular big fight, so I don't know why they've decided to go for it again. But for me personally speaking, I didn't think it was needed. I thought Chris Eubank could move on and maybe have, that one defining fight in his career. I don't think this should be the defining fight in his career. He's 35 years of age now. He needs a defining fight for me to really solidify his own legacy in boxing. Conor Benn is young enough and hungry enough to move on and try and fight in the welterweight division or the super welterweight division and look for, a major name. He's been calling names out left, right and centre over the past 12 months. So I kind of thought that's the way this would go. But I understand why they want to do it again. They want to give themselves this little bit of legacy behind them. They're fighting each other twice like their fathers did before them. Personally, again, I'll be watching. I'll be tuning in because I'm doing this podcast about it. But I didn't feel there was a need for it. That being said, what do I think about it happening? Well, like I say, first one, pleasantly surprised. The second one, will it live up to the same billing as the first one? I'm not so sure because we had a comprehensive winner. I think if it would have been closer on the cards, I think it would have been more controversial. There definitely would be some excitement around this happening again. How do I see it playing out? Well, if you go back to the first fight and you look at the aggressiveness that Conor Benn shown in the first half of the fight, maybe he came on too strong too soon. Maybe he should have boxed and spent more time trying to get that range right, pick those shots correctly, rather than trying to go in there and be a bulldozer, which is what he tried to do in the first fight. And I think he came unstuck during parts of the fight. So when I look at the second fight, I think to myself, if Conor Benn really wants to do some damage in this fight, if he really wants to try and make Eubank look the older man that he is in this fight, then he's got to be smarter. Okay, he can go in there with that brute force throughout the fight, but he needs to be smarter about how he does it. He needs to pick his times. He needs to pick his moments, because Chris Eubank Jr.'s boxing ability is better. Not everybody will agree. Some people will disagree. I feel Chris Eubank Jr. is a better boxer than Conor Benn overall. And I think that's what played dividends, and the experience he has played dividends on the night. I think the experience that Conor Benn will have taken from this fight will certainly help him going into the second bout between one another, because he will now know what to expect from Chris Eubank Jr. He will now know that he has to be a lot smarter. He'll now know he needs to use more movement in the ring. He can't be square on. He can't come in straight lines at Chris Eubank Jr. He's got to make sure he gets inside and out quickly enough that Chris Eubank Jr. can't land. He's got to be faster and first in this fight. If he can do that, then this fight will be a different fight. But Chris Eubank Jr., for me, doesn't have to do anything different. At this age, the experience he has, if he goes into this fight in a similar fashion as the first fight, then he can quite happily win this fight. He might adopt a different approach this time. He might actually be the more aggressive, the more rugged fighter, and actually put the pressure on Conor Benn, and then maybe bring Conor Benn into that dogfight that Conor Benn wanted the first time round. It's really intriguing when you get into the depths of how these fights can play out, when you think about the possibilities of game plans that could come into this ring on Saturday night. I think for me, with this particular fight, you've got to really look at what changes can be made in both camps to adjust for this second fight. As I've said, Chris Eubank Jr. can continue where he left off, whereas Conor Benn, he needs to be different. He needs to be first. He needs to be faster. He needs to not gas himself out too soon. He needs to not be putting 110% in those early rounds to try and stamp authority on the fight. He needs to be strategic. I think if he's more strategic, he'll get more success. If he's the faster fighter, he'll get more success. This could be a more closer fight if he does it that way. But if Chris Eubank Jr. continues to dominate and continues to work the game plan as he did in the first fight, it is going to make it a more interesting and more closer affair. But I also, for those that are expecting another dogfight, another slugfest, I also think there's a possibility this could actually be an anticlimax for people. That it won't be as good as the first fight, that you won't get that level of aggressiveness in the first fight, that actually you'll get more of a chess match, strategic movements around the ring, lateral movements, more feints, more trickery going on in the ring. I think that's what I'm kind of expecting on Saturday night with the two of these. I'm not expecting it to be the same as before. I think there will be moments. I think there'll definitely be moments where they'll both pick the moments where they want to get aggressive and they want to push on the front foot and they want to land those shots on the inside and try and hurt one another. And there's always going to be moments with these two types of fighters and the emotion and the history that's behind it, where they are going to both look for those opportunities to drag one another down to a point where they make a mistake. And that's what brings the excitement level to the fight, of course. But I do say this with a warning, don't expect it to be as good as the first fight. If it surpasses the first fight, hey, I'm all for that. If it ends up being a dogfight, I'm all for that. Like, it's a legacy for the pair of them, isn't it? Like, you can understand why they both want to run it back. Conor Benn feels they can do better. Chris Eubank Jr. just wants to repeat the feat and move on and take the money as well while he's at it. So it is an interesting sort of dynamic of how this second fight will play out. I've kind of gone through a little bit of keys to victory as well as giving, a breakdown of how it could play out. But I suppose what people are always going to want to know is which side of the fence am I going to sit on this time round? Am I going to go with a repeat for Chris Eubank Jr., or do I think Conor Benn can actually steal a victory from him this time? Well, with everything that I've said in the episode and everything that I've said about how the fight could play out, my initial reaction, my initial thought process about this is that I think it'll be a closer fight, a closer affair than the first fight. But I still feel like Chris Eubank Jr.'s experience and ability is in a better place than Conor Benn's. And I think he can repeat the feat. And if I was gambling on this fight and I was putting a bet on for this fight, I'd be going for Chris Eubank Jr. Another points decision. I think he can do that. I think he can comprehensively outbox Conor Benn. However, we've seen Chris Eubank Jr. before get surprised. Liam Smith surprised him a couple of years ago and he rematched Liam Smith and obviously beat him comprehensively. But in that first fight, he got surprised, he got caught, he got hurt. Can that happen again? Absolutely. 100%. And that would make it a completely different fight if Conor Benn caught him early. Look, I'm convincing myself otherwise here. I've told you that I'm looking at Chris Eubank Jr. as the winner, but I'm actually convincing myself otherwise. It is just a possibility. I'm trying to explore all avenues with this fight because the last thing I want to do is not explore these possibilities and then for someone to come and go, do you know what, Sean, you were totally wrong. You shouldn't have said this. You shouldn't have said that. Look, it's hard to encompass how a fight is actually going to play out. You could say one thing and another thing happens and all of a sudden people disrespect your opinion because you've got it wrong. But then if you get it on the money, absolutely nailed on, all of a sudden you're a boxing expert. And it's not necessarily the case. If you've got the experience of watching fights for many years, if you've been around the sport, if you've competed in the sport yourself physically, you'll get more of an insight into the possibilities of what can happen in a ring. Definitely. It doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to be right. And anyone who sits there parading on social media saying these things, they're just putting themselves in a position where they're setting themselves up for a fall, where people are just going to absolutely blast them on social media, which is why I tend not to, go with I'm a prediction specialist mantra, because I'm not. I know these things can change, these fights can change in an instant, and they do. And that's what could happen here. I could say Chris Eubank Jr. could absolutely go in there and dominate, and his boxing ability and experience and gets another unanimous decision. But all it takes is Conor Benn to strategically time a combination, and all of a sudden the fight turns on its head, and then we've got Chris Eubank Jr. wobbling all over the show, maybe getting on the seat of his pants, and then the fight dynamic changes, and then maybe Conor Benn ends up going on to win the fight, and then we get a rubber match. There is a possibility of all this happening, and I'm not ruling any of that out. But if I'm going off my gut instinct and what my head is telling me, so both things are telling me the same thing, which is Chris Eubank Jr. can repeat this feat and he can beat Conor Benn. In terms of moving forward, I know I'd normally do this in the post-fight show, but it could be a damaging loss for Conor Benn if he loses again to Chris Eubank Jr. And that's the risk. That's a big risk that he's really taking at this stage of his career. I know he's young. He's 27, I think he is now. He's still young in the game. He's still young enough to come back and fight again. But taking 2 losses back to back like this, quite damaging for a fighter's career. I know fighters can resurrect their careers and can have, that Indian summer or whichever cliche saying you want to use for it. They can do that. But it's going to be really difficult if he loses again to him. So it makes it a little bit more spicier, a little bit more intense maybe when Conor Benn gets in there. But he's got to stick to his plan. I'm absolutely adamant. Whatever plan they've got to stick to it. If they revert to type and try to slug it out with Chris Eubank Jr., I really don't think it's going to work for them. So they've got to stick to that plan. If Chris Eubank Jr. continues to do what he's done in the first fight and picks it up as round 13, then for me, I think he can go on and be comprehensive again in this one. But Conor Benn can turn it upside his head. Conor Benn is the one I think that's got more to lose. I don't know if people do agree with me on that, but I think he has. I think with Chris Eubank Jr., what's he? honestly, what has he got to lose at the moment? What he's got high rankings with organisations. He's not got a title shot. He's not out there fighting anybody. He's not had his name put forward for a big fight. I mean, there's always been talk of him fighting Canelo at some point, and obviously Canelo coming off the back of a loss to Crawford, that would be an interesting fight. You'd get Chris Eubank Jr. maybe moving up to super middleweight for that. That could actually happen. That's a feasible fight. So maybe he does have that to lose potentially. Maybe there is something in the background there that might be spurring him on for that one legacy defining fight. But Conor Benn losing back to back against Chris Eubank Jr., the older man, isn't really going to put his career any further forward. It's going to set it back even more than losing to him the first time. It's going to be really difficult for Conor Benn to sell himself as a future world champion. You can't look at somebody who's lost back to back to an older fighter, a fighter who's then had to boil themselves down to make the weight, and think he's going to be a world champion. You do kind of lose a little bit of faith in that fighter's abilities. You've got to admit it. Most people will admit it. Boxing fans are fickle. I will admit it. If Conor Benn loses here, I'll lose a little bit of faith that I don't think he's ever going to be a world champion. It would take something else. He would have to get to a point in his career where he gets lucky in one of the lower divisions that a belt becomes vacant, or he gets a champion that's perceived as a weaker champion who he could actually go on and beat. But again, it's a big risk for him going back to back here, because if he loses, I do think it's damaging for his career. I'd love to know what people think on it. Let me know your thoughts. You can let me know, of course, on the social media channels and on Spotify. Please do let me know, because I'm really interested to hear what people have got to say on some of these points here. I do think there are some very valid points, and I do think there are obviously people out there with a complete difference of opinion and absolutely will rubbish what I say on the podcast and believe that I'm absolutely talking out of my backside. But at the end of the day, it's just what I perceive, what I see, and my opinions, and that's why I do it. And people out there that listen to the show, they have value in my opinion. A lot of people have value in my opinion, but then there's obviously a lot of people that will always challenge it. And that's great to challenge it. It's great to have that counter argument, because it makes the conversation different. And it's only because I've recently just moved and I've just got myself reset up again, which is why I've not been able to get anybody on the show to counter-argue this conversation with me. So I'm relying on you guys listening to this show to make them comments, because I can reply on those comments. If you're listening on Spotify, you can drop a comment below, or if you're on the social media channels and you're on Facebook or you're on Instagram, you can drop messages on there, no problem. I'm very active on there. I'm always scheduling stuff in and posting stuff out across the day. So it's definitely worth putting it out there. And there will be posts going out, of course, about the fight coming up, and probably quotes and press conferences, things like that. So definitely drop me some messages of predictions and whatever you think about it, because it will be really interesting to see what other people are thinking. The general consensus that I'm perceiving at the moment is Chris Eubank Jr. is gonna repeat the feat. But of course, I see a lot of other people saying opposite, that they think Conor Benn's gonna smash him. Those are the words I've seen. He's going to smash him. He's going to have him. This time he's going to make it right. Get you. You clearly totally believe that Conor Benn's going to do it. And again, I'll reiterate what I've said throughout the episode. I'm not saying he cannot do it. I just don't think he will in this instance. And if he proves me wrong, fair play to him. Absolutely fair play to him. He then deserves his chance to push his name forward off the back of that win, because it will do wonders for his career. I don't care what people say, whether they say, oh, well, Eubank never did anything in his career, or he's an older fighter, he's got him at the right time, he's on the way down. Whatever you want to say, those cliche sayings that come out when a fighter loses a fight, it's still a big win for Conor Benn. It's a risk for him to lose, but it's also a great reward as well for him to get the win, because it will propel his career a little bit further forward. And I think given the scandal he had from their original proposed fight 3 years ago, he needs a big win. He needs something to propel him into the forefront of the big fighters' minds. He needs that, because he can sit there on social media and call people out, but nobody's really listening to him. When you look around on social media, he can have interactions with different American boxing superstars, but nobody really is interested in that fight with him. Yeah, he brings a crowd. Yeah, he can put bums on seats in the UK, but outside of the UK, he doesn't really bring any value. So it's difficult. He needs the win. Chris Eubank Jr. could be argued to be the same. He doesn't really bring as much value because unless you're a major British boxing fan outside of British boxing, yeah, you've got a lot of people that know Chris Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn from their fights in the 90s. But, the average boxing fan in this day and age are not really interested in the likes of Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn or their sons. So it doesn't bring value to the American audience or the South American audience or the Canadian audience. Yeah, you probably get the Australian audience, but you ain't gonna get any other audiences there. So it doesn't sell. Big fight won't sell with either of these two guys in unless they can do something significant. So for them both, really, they do need to win. Eubank needs to repeat it, and Conor Benn needs to get the win to propel his career and at least kickstart it into a position where he can actually get a big fight and move forward in his career. The thing is, he's always going to have that skid mark stain on his career now because of the incident with the drug scandal, with the PED scandal. He's always going to be there. It's going to be a stain on his legacy. So no matter what he does, that will always be there. People are not going to forget that. Just like they won't let other people forget it. People don't let Canelo forget it. But yet Canelo, I mean, there's no difference really. I'm not even going to justify like Canelo. He's come back and yeah, he's a global boxing superstar and he's put bums on seats and he's a big draw in Vegas and all the rest of it. But the real boxing fans know, the hardcore boxing fans know, like, he got caught with a substance in his body. The same way Tyson Fury got caught with nandrolone all those years ago. The same that's been said for other fighters over the years. It's been said for many, many other fighters over the years. People don't forget about it, but then you get obviously the casual watchers of the sport that tune in for the big fights. They don't necessarily think about these moments and don't really go back to them. So yeah, Conor Benn could go in there and smash Chris Eubank, and people automatically have forgotten about what happened 3 years ago, and then they've gone on and said, yeah, Conor Benn's going to beat such and such a body in the super welterweight division and all this, and he's like, I don't forget. And neither do a lot of boxing fans, and neither do a lot of people within the industry. They don't forget like what's happened and the scandals that surround these. Who can forget Conor Benn going on the telly and talking about this stuff? You can't. You can't just erase this stuff from people's memories. It's not going to go away. It'll always be a stain on his legacy. So no matter what he does, that's always going to be there. However, I'm obviously going to be objective in the matter, and I'm going to talk about this fight as a fight and a possible future for either of these two men, despite my personal feelings towards what happened a couple of years ago. I do think it's an interesting fight. I do think it's one that is going to provide some entertainment for us at the weekend, and it will be really interesting to see what the outcome is and how it affects and shapes the careers of both men moving forward, because a loss for Chris Eubank Jr. will probably mean a rematch and a rubber match between the two of them. It's probably inevitable. It's probably already written up that if Chris Eubank Jr. loses and Conor Benn wins, there will be a rematch, because it'll just make money for the promoters and everybody involved. Of course, they'll do it again next year in the summer. Big fight. Wembley Stadium, maybe. They'll do that. That's what they'll do. But if it's a repeat performance from Chris Eubank Jr., that ain't going to happen again. It's going to affect Conor Benn's career. Chris Eubank Jr. might get that Canelo fight or another big fight in his career, and that'll be him going off into the sunset, where Conor Benn will have to scratch and claw his way back up the rankings again to be able to be in with an opportunity to even fight for a world title in one of the divisions, whichever one he decides to sit himself in. So it does have some ramifications for both of these gentlemen. So again, I'm really interested to hear people's predictions, thoughts and feelings. I'm going to go with Chris Eubank Jr. I know I've said it a few times, but I'm summarising the episode now and coming to the end. Chris Eubank Jr. wins this on a repeat performance. If Conor Benn does win it and he does beat him, we're going to get the rubber match. It's inevitable, isn't it? It's going to have to happen. So that brings an end to my preview for this main fight. I am just going to quickly run down the rest of the fights on this particular card. There are a couple, but I think are definitely worth tuning into on this card. I know there are some where people look at it and go, you know what, I'm not really interested in that. But I think there's a good 3, maybe 4 fights out of the whole card which do intrigue me, which I'm looking forward to. I like the Sam Gillian Ishmael Davis fight. I think that's a good fight for both of them in the super welterweight division. Richard Riakporhe, an undefeated 16-0 Tommy Welch. I think that is a good fight. That's up at the heavyweight division. Riakporhe now up in the heavyweight division against Tommy Welch. I think that's a good one as well. Jack Catterall versus Echo Asuman. I think that's also going to be an underrated, sneaky one in the welterweight division on the card. That's one I'll be tuning into. You've also got Adam Azim versus Kurt Scobie, which is in the super lightweight division. You've got Mikey Talon versus Fezan Shahid, which for me is prospect versus, I wouldn't call him a journeyman. Shahid, he's got 4-2-2 on his resume, but it is one to get Mikey Talon back out. I would say it's not a bad card. Is it pay-per-view worthy? This conversation comes up a lot with some of these pay-per-views. I had this one with Hamed a couple of weeks ago with the Parker Wardley card. Was it pay-per-view worthy? No, I don't think it was. I don't think this is either. I'll be honest with you. I don't think this is a pay-per-view. I understand like what DAZN have just done now. They've brought their ultimate pricing package out now. I think it's like £22 or £23 a month now for you to pay every month for a year, and you'll get all the pay-per-views included, and you'll get obviously all the standard shows. I don't think this is a pay-per-view show. I'll be totally honest. Yeah, they've got great names behind them. They've got great legacies with their fathers. But how is it a justifiable pay-per-view? The card, it's got some good fights on it. I've mentioned those good fights. For me, it doesn't warrant it. It really doesn't. And it's, I know I'm sort of talking to the brick wall here when I say it. I just think it's one of those fights that would an absolutely barnstorming chief support fight for a bigger fight. That would be more justifiable on a pay-per-view for me, personally speaking. I know there'll be people that totally agree with me and people that probably say, oh, well, it is, it's the names and it's this and it's that. There'll be always a justification for why it should be a pay-per-view. For me personally, I don't think it is. I think it's a fight where they're not at a stage in their careers. I'm laughing when I say it because if it was like a world title fight, for example, if this was a big fight, a world title fight, one of them had a title on the line or they were fighting for a vacant title, yeah, I totally get it. They're not fighting for any type of title. They're fighting for bragging rights more than anything. It's more of a battle of pride than anything else. So why does that justify being a pay-per-view price for it? But this is what the promoters do in this day and age. They'll sell you a fight that 5 to 10 years ago would have been a chief support for an Anthony Joshua fight or a Cal Froch fight. This is what we're getting sold today and as being an acceptable pay-per-view. The Wardley and Parker one the other week, I don't think that was a pay-per-view. Even the fight, WBO interim heavyweight title, no, it wasn't a pay-per-view. You shouldn't have had to pay for that fight. Again, that should have been part of a bigger card. But I understand why the promoters do it. They sell that one big fight, and then they sometimes give us a decent undercard, sometimes give us a bit of a crap one. I don't think this is a bad undercard. I think this is better than the undercard that we had in April, if I'm being honest. I thought this is a better undercard to watch in terms of the fights being matched on here. Certainly don't think it's justifiable for pay-per-view. So I know there'll be a lot of people, again, as I said to Hamed the other week, there's going to be a lot of people that won't pay for it or they won't pay for DAZN. They'll go in different ways and directions of how to watch this fight because it's not justifiable. It's making it more difficult for the average boxing fan to tune in. Like, nobody's going to want to pay a one-off cost for a fight where they're not world-level stars. They're not superstars. Maybe in British boxing terms, you could say they are. But some people argue they're not even that in British boxing terms. But they haven't even got a world title up for grabs. There's nothing up for grabs, like I've said. So for me, it doesn't justify it. So I hope that answers the question for anybody that might have wanted to ask that question, which is, do you agree it should have been a pay-per-view? No, I don't. What do I think about the DAZN pricing structure? That's probably another question that people have. Well, I'm glad that they've put some more clarity on the situation now. I'm glad that we've actually got an understanding of, the pricing structure. They should have had this sorted ages ago. I think they probably would have got more subscribers if they would have been more transparent from day one. They finally got there in the end after going around the block and back. Is it a good pricing structure? Do you get value for money with that? I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's a bad pricing structure. As long as they can provide, and this is where it goes more intricate now, as long as they can provide us with high quality pay-per-views. If you're getting Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley as one of your pay-per-views, and you're getting this fight as one of your pay-per-views, is it worth it? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. What is your level of expectation when it comes down to pay-per-views? And that's where it becomes tricky, because when you get people like myself who love the sport, who want to see, the best possible fights. For example, when we had a few of the ring cards, when we've had like Beterbiev and Bivol, and we've had like the heavyweight stacked one last December, that for me was more justifiable of a pay-per-view, and would be paid for singularly. But as part of a package, I would absolutely be loving that if I was getting those types of cards for for 12 pay-per-views or 11 pay-per-views or whatever it is. But if I'm getting these types of fights as my pay-per-views for the year, is it justifiable for that price? I'm not so sure. That's where my opinion would change a little bit, and I'd think, well, actually, I'm not so sure about whether it is justifiable to pay that price every single month if the quality of pay-per-views are something to be desired. It's another can of worms to open, with more questions to be answered and more opinions to put out there in the world. That is my final thought for the show today. Thank you so much, as always, for supporting and listening to the show. I'm looking forward to it, guys. I will be back, of course, with a reaction show to this. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And again, I'm going with Eubank on points. Be interested to hear what you think about this. So let me know on Spotify below if you're listening on there, or any available podcasting app that you're listening on. If it has a comments function, drop a comment in below. If you just want to drop a message on Instagram or Facebook and let me know your thoughts and feelings, you can always do that. I'll always drop a response in there, and I'll let you know any further additions to that, of course. Anybody that wants to email, some people still do email in this day and age, as opposed to going on social media. It's beyondtheropesboxingpodcast@gmail.com. You can email me on there. I'll do my best to respond in a timely fashion, and I'll get back to you with any more additional thoughts on it. But for now, that is everything for the show. Thank you, as always, for listening, and I'll see you next time on the show for a reaction to this weekend's big fight. Chris Eubank Jr., Conor Benn. Let's get at them.